Chapter 32. Corran wetted the small cloth swab with ethyl alcohol and rubbed it over the focal end of the Blastech DL-44 heavy blaster pistol. He peered at it closely, then gave it one more light pass with the cloth. As the alcohol evaporated, he saw Gavin reflected in miniature. "Ah, Gavin, this is the third time you've asked me if you could ask me a question." The kid blushed as he snapped the trigger assembly for his Sorosub S1BR into the receiver housing. "I know. Sorry." Gavin kept his voice low enough that no one in the warehouse space aside from Corran could hear him. "I wanted to ask you about, you know." Corran winced. He didn't know, but that sort of thing was only said as preface to a question about killing or sex. Since Gavin had long ago become an ace and had acquitted himself well in the fight in the warehouse across Invisisec, Corran assumed the question had to be about sex. His parents should have told him about this before they let him go off to war, shouldn't they? Corran looked around to see if Wedge was nearby, figuring he would do a much better job helping Gavin. He couldn't see Wedge anywhere. Corran shrugged his shoulders and eased the concentration element into the barrel of the blaster pistol. "What's your question?" Gavin set his face in what he clearly thought was a serious expression, but the general youthfulness of his features undermined the effort. "On Tatooine, in Anchorhead, in the area around the farm, it was small, and so we didn't have a school the way you did on Corellia, see. We all took classes via a local holonet and sent lessons in on data cards, you know." Corran fit the barrel assembly together and snapped it into the gun's frame. "Gavin, are you trying to tell me you don't know how to kiss a girl?" The young man pulled his head up and blinked, then frowned. "Anchorhead may have been small, but not that small. Kin doesn't count." Gavin blushed. "I wasn't related to everyone around there, you know." Corran raised his hands and smiled. I know. I was just giving you a hard time. What is it that you want to know?" "Well, you've been around a lot, and you come from Corellia." Gavin's voice dropped precipitously. "You've seen, two people get together, but they're different, right?" "Do you mean like Arisi and me? We come from different worlds, but we're both human, though we haven't gotten together." "No, I mean like Nawara and Rasati." "Oh." Corran nodded slowly. Throughout the galaxy, the permutations of relationships between two or more individuals were legion, as were the rules, formal and otherwise, that governed their conduct. Prohibitions on relationships between races and classes and castes varied from planet to planet, but the rules governing interspecies relationships tended to be largely similar. The majority of them were set by official imperial policy, a policy Corsac officials had called "look but don't touch." Exotic and different can be very attractive, Gavin. There are some folks who absolutely draw the line on dating outside their species, while there are others who seem to be interested in experiencing anything and everything they can. Corran shrugged. "I guess I don't think it's wrong, but it just may not be right." "I don't think I follow you. I wasn't very clear. Look, would you like to have children someday? Have a family?" "Yeah, I think so." "Okay. What if the person you fall for isn't capable of having children with a human?" "I would... I don't know." "There are other problems, too, and we're not talking the possible difficulties and dangers of making love, either." "Dangers?" "Sure. Suppose the person you're with is used to giving and getting gentle little love nips with 10-centimeter long teeth." Corran hooked two fingers over like fangs. "Your hide isn't as thick as a Gomorian, so you'd be leaking." "I hadn't thought about that." Gavin frowned and his shoulders slumped. "I mean, I don't think that'll be a problem. Some species don't live as long as we do, though amid present company, life expectancy isn't that big an issue." Corran picked up a new heavy blaster and began to disassemble it for cleaning. There are lots of things you can take into consideration, Gavin, but it pretty much boils down to the same thing. Relationships between humans do. If you and the other person get along, problems can be worked out. Gavin nodded. So, have you ever, you know... The young man's voice trailed off as color rose to his cheeks. Corran felt two hands on his shoulders and looked back to see Ayala's smiling face above his. Has Corran ever what? Corran shrugged his shoulders. Nothing. Mirax appeared on his left and leaned on the table between Corran and Gavin. Her dark hair had been pulled back into a thick braid. The look on Gavin's face doesn't suggest it was nothing, Corsac. Ayala's hands tightened playfully on the back of his neck. Come on, Corran. There's not much you haven't done. A smile blossomed on Gavin's face, and Corran suddenly felt outnumbered, and reluctant to answer Gavin's question. He knew it wasn't because of Ayala's presence. She already knew the answer and could even tell the story better than he could, and he figured Gavin would find it amusing and make him less nervous. Clearly, Gavin wanted to hear that Corran had dated an alien because the boy obviously had an interest in someone, and from the glances Corran had seen and the stories he'd heard, Gavin was thinking a lot about the Bothan, Asir Salar. While Corran thought she was a bit worldlier than Gavin could handle, he was willing to bet the farm boy from Tatooine could learn fast. He found his reluctance to say anything came from Mirax's presence and his feelings towards her. Irisi and Rosati had been paired together for their part of planning the operation, giving Corran time apart from her. It allowed him to put Irisi into perspective. Even though they were of the same species and even were attracted to each other, something deep down inside told Corran that their getting together would be wrong. Not wrong, a disaster. Everything that made Irisi wrong seemed to make Mirax right. She understood him because of their common background. Granted, their fathers had been enemies. Corran characterized them as chronic enemies instead of mortal enemies, but that gave them a base that he would never have with Irisi. Ultimately, with Irisi, he knew he'd have felt like a pet, whereas with Mirax, he felt like a friend and equal. During the planning operations on Coruscant, Mirax, Gavin, and Ayala had gone out and secured a lot of supplies for the operation. Things were scarce, and, if available at all, were high-priced. More than once, Corran wished Emtray had been on Coruscant to help with procurement, but Mirax proved every bit as equal at obtaining things. Whereas the droid might have used an instant analysis of a trader's wares to figure out his markup and squeeze him until his prices became reasonable, Mirax charmed, cajoled, wheedled, and even threatened. She'd learned every trick in the book from her father, and Corran thought old Booster would be proud when he learned about her exploits. But there's so much about her I don't know, like a reaction to learning I dated outside my species. Fear that she might see such an action as making him unclean or unworthy killed any quip he might have tossed at Ayala. He looked up at Mirax, but saw no suspicion or disappointment in her face. Gavin fit two pieces of the blaster rifle together and tightened down a restraining bolt. I wanted to know if he'd ever dated anyone who wasn't human. Ayala laughed. Well, there were plenty of women he dated who weren't human, in spirit, that is. Mirax sniffed lightly. But why bring the Bacta Queen into this? I never dated Irisi. No, you just pretended to be her Kawadi impregnator, then kissed her in full view of the Grand Hall of the Galaxy in the Imperial Palace. Mirax shook her head. Clearly no relationship there at all. Corran laughed. The way you tell it, I might have actually had fun. Ayala lightly cuffed the back of his head. You always did complain about the easiest duty, Horn. Believe me, I'd take Shertil Rurwar over Irisi gladly. Oh? Ayala raised an eyebrow. That's interesting. Gavin frowned. Who's Shertil Rurwar? Mirax straightened up and tapped a finger against her chin. Sounds Solonian. It is. Ayala smiled broadly. Tell them, Corran. No, you tell them. You tell it better. You don't mind? If I have to be mortified, I'd prefer not to do it to myself. Mirax swung around and seated herself on the edge of the table. This sounds wonderful. She winked at Corran, then looked at Ayala. Go ahead. He'll survive it. True. It's not like it's the first time he's heard this. Ayala smiled, and Corran knew she'd put on a good face on the incident. Shertel Ruralwar was a female Salonian who had been sent to our unit to get some training. It was a cultural exchange program. She was tall, at least 2 meters, and slender. Salonians are all very lithe, and she was covered with relatively short black fur that glistened a silver blue when the light hit it right. Definitely gorgeous. Definitely humanoid, but definitely not human. The annual Corsac Awards Ball was coming up, and she didn't know anyone. Salonians tend to be very private sorts of people, and the only ones you see in public are sterile females. They run things in their society and maintain a family unit with fertile males and females, but she was all alone. The unattached male officers in our branches put together a pool to see who would take Shertil to the celebration. Each man was required to buy a ticket for 5 credits, and the winner, whom everyone considered a loser, would get the pot to compensate for the evening. Mirax frowned. It strikes me that the whole process was the wrong way around. Corran smiled. The awards ball pool is a tradition dating from a time when the director had a daughter who, as decorum dictated, could not go into the ball unescorted. The director refused to order someone to ask her to go, though he did order participation in the pool. Most years, the prize is someone in the squad who has volunteered to be won, with the money going to the Survivors and Orphans Fund. This year, though, the prize was Shertil, and she knew nothing about it. Most everyone who knew what was going on thought it was barbaric, but they hid behind tradition. Gavin smiled. And Corran won, right? You could say that. Ayala gave him a gentle punch on the shoulder. What he did was talk to the women who really wanted to go to the ball with the other officers and gave them the impression that the whole thing had been rigged. Whatever ticket their guy had would be selected as the winning ticket. The only way their man could get out of winning would be to get out of the pool. When pressed, Corran allowed that he could be bribed into taking on just one more ticket, but it would have to be a secret. The women pressured their men to get Corran to take their tickets. By the time the pool winner was chosen, Corran had all the tickets. Mirax beamed at him. Quite enterprising, sir. Well, I knew I'd be miserable because of how my life was going at the time, so I saw no reason for anyone else to be away from the person they wanted to be with. But you did something noble. That's good. It gets better, Mirax. Corran gave the pool and the bribes to the fund, then went all out and showed Shertil the time of her life. He hired a repulsor limo, found out what kind of flowers were considered appropriate by Salonians, and flew out in his X-Wing to the only import florist on Corellia who had them in bloom to get them. He even got a new formal dress uniform tailored up for the occasion, and he proved he cleans up very well. For her part, Shertil was nothing short of stunning. She had that long, sleek physique that enabled her to wear a slinking gown over which light slithered. She wore a necklace of silver and aquamarine, and a bracelet to match that looked like light playing across her fur. Every woman who saw her was instantly jealous, and Corran was the envy of all the men. And to make it worse, they actually enjoyed each other's company. That was about 6 months after his father's death, and things had been rough for Corran, so the whole situation seemed perfect. Excuse me. Being unable to stop a smile from tugging at the corner of his mouth, Corran nodded, and discovered he was disinclined to kill the smile. That evening was a lot of fun. I put enough energy into it that I got to leave my life behind for a while. It was great. Gavin leaned forward. So what happened? Corran looked up at Ayala. Spare the salacious details, please. Mirax smiled. You can elaborate another time, Ayala. Ayala shrugged. Though Shertil was infertile, it didn't mean she was incapable. Apparently she had enjoyed the evening as much as Corran had, and they continued to celebrate after they left the ball. Is that circumspect enough for you? It'll do. Was it Gavin began to blush. Corran gave him a wink. Better. Mirax raised an eyebrow. Well, then what? Imagine finding a pile of rocks, deciding to throw them out, dropping one, and having it split open to reveal a Corusca gem embedded in the middle. Oh my. And with each stone after that, the Corusca gem is more luminous and beautiful than the one before it. I see. Very special indeed. And each of those stones, when fitted together, creates a brilliant, exquisitely carved sculpture. I've got the hologram digitized and analyzed here, Corran. Thanks. Gavin blinked. Wow. Mirax's brown eyes narrowed. So if it was as great as all that, how come you're here and not in some den on Salonia? Corran winced. Well, there was one little microscopic problem. Ayala nodded. The chemistry wasn't right. Sounds like it was perfect to me. Gavin grinned broadly. Personal chemistry, yes, Gavin, was perfect. Personal biochemistry was not, however. Ayala rested a hand on Corran's shoulder. The reason the lucky charm Corran wears is on a gold chain is because his sweat is acidic enough to tarnish something like silver. It's within normal range for a human, mind you, but just on the acidic end. And that was sufficient to get through the waxy surface of Shirtle's fur and irritate her skin. And as it turned out, Corran was mildly allergic to her fur. It was much like being sunburned all over for the both of us. Mirax giggled for a second, then made herself appear sober and saddened. That's horrible. Corran shrugged. Unfortunately, it's life. He looked over at Gavin. There you have it, kid. My advice? See what happens. It can't hurt, except in rare cases. Gavin set the blaster rifle down and stood. Thanks. I'll take your advice. If you'll excuse me. Good luck, Gavin. Corran waved him on his way, then smiled up at Ayala. Nicely told. Mirax's brows furrowed. How much of that was true? All of it. Every bit. She frowned. Oh, that's so sad, though. Corran shook his head. Not really. We both knew we were living out a fantasy, but it wouldn't have worked in the long run. I had no desire to move to Salonia and become a part of a brood home. Shirtle knew she couldn't bear the children I'd want. We remain friends and both have wonderful memories. In fact, that was the best ending I had for any of my relationships. True, Corran, but that's because you never listened to my advice about the women you were interested in. Ayala shook her head. Disasters, every one of them. Mirax smiled. And what is your impression of the Bacta Queen? Her? All wrong for Corran. Attractive, sure, but just not his kind of woman. My thoughts exactly. I've told him so, but he doesn't listen. Never has. Corran held his hands up in surrender. Stop, please. You may not think Arisi is right for me, and I don't really think so either. A conclusion I came up with on my own, too, I might add. Regardless, though, she doesn't deserve this. Isarn Isard wouldn't deserve this. Ayala glanced down at him. Actually, Isarn Isard does deserve this. Corran thought for a moment. Yeah, you're right. She does. Carry on. By the time you're done, I'll have finished cleaning all of these blaster pistols. Then we'll be ready to do the job that really needs to be done. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.